Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Africa Update here on Trust Television. We will bring you what's happening on the African continent. And this week, it promises to be quite educating and interesting. Don't go nowhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa Update here on Trust Television, reaching from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. And I'm your host, Chiamaka, Nwafor. Now this week on the show, we're taking a look at what's happening in Ghana, South Sudan, and other issues taking place on our beautiful continent, Africa. So let's start with Ghana, where former Ghanaian President Mahama has been cleared of any corruption allegations by the special prosecutor. His brother has been accused of accepting bribes on behalf of the head of state from aerospace agent Airbus. Those allegations arose amidst confession from Airbus officials in the US and UK courts. Now, France 24 correspondent Justice Baidu tells us more.
Out of UK, US and French investigations into the issue of European aircraft maker Airbus paying bribes of up to 5 million euros to a network of persons that were accused of brokering these deals on behalf of the Ghanaian government. It was part of the scandal that broke in 23 African countries, including Ghana.
While the accepted facts in the two foreign jurisdictions are that the employees of Airbus designed the payments to the intermediaries as bribes intended to court favor with Ghanaian public officials, especially ex-President John Dramani Mahama. On the other hand, the intermediaries appeared to expect and receive the payments as their legitimate expectation under an arrangement of success-based commissions for the sale of the military transport aircraft to the government of Ghana.
There you have it, what's happening in Ghana. Now, that issue actually took place sometime last week, but we're going to be delving into it today. And joining us from Accra, the capital of Ghana, is a private legal practitioner, Solum Adonu. Good afternoon, Mr. Solum. Thank you for joining us today on Africa Update.
Hi, good afternoon.
So now let's get to the conversation. You're there in Ghana. Can you tell us about this Airbus scandal, what's about, and how the former president, Mahama, got involved in it?
All right, so in Ghana, we call it the Airbus scandal. So it's, when the former president's government came to power in 2009, he was vice president at the time. So what happened really was that the military or government decided to acquire some aircraft for the military because per their assessment, the military needed those. So the vice president, being the chairman of the Armed Forces Council, was the one put in charge of it. So what happened was they tried to get in touch with some manufacturers of aircraft across the world. They got some from the US and other places. It did happen that they did not meet their specs in terms of cost and delivery timelines. Incidentally, or perhaps incidentally, his brother, who was adopted when they were young to the UK by some missionaries called Samuel Adam Mahama Foster, also got to start working with Airbus. And so for some reason, it does appear that the demand or the request and then the appointment of his brother came together. I don't know how that happened. So, his brother became an intermediary, became the person that Airbus used to get to the brother in Ghana. The brother then was a vice president who was leading the process of acquiring the aircraft. So, fast forward, the deal went through. They delivered two of the aircraft in 2011 and 2012, C295 aircraft, and then delivered a third one in 2014. So, sometime in 2019, 2020, the United States and the UK did a joint investigation into the activities and operations of Airbus in some countries across the world, and Ghana happened to be one of those countries. I must say that the investigation was not specifically on Ghana. It was generally on Airbus and how their dealings were. So they traced a few things and realized that Airbus had what it called success-based commissions it paid to its agents abroad. These success-based commissions have been generally said to be bribes designed to lure or to influence public officials or influential people in these countries to give them deals. So here we have a brother of the vice president who was an agent of Airbus. So you see how it works. So he now got in touch with him and it happened. It's also important to point out that there were initial inquiries, like I did mention, from the US and other places regarding the cost of the aircraft and the delivery times. It so happened that the Airbus people were able to satisfy the cost requirements and they were able to satisfy the delivery date requirements from Ghana. So it worked. So when it happened, so there was a deferred prosecution agreement which was reached between Airbus and the US and the UK authorities, which essentially means that, yes, we are not going to contest the matter. We are guilty, so let the matters end. And I must state that DPAs are entered by organizations, not necessarily because they are guilty, but because they do not want their matters to be in the public domain because of the potential implications that will have on future business. So they were fined some huge sums of money, etc. So when this report came up, Ghana was mentioned that government official one, that was how they coded names of some of the people. Government official one in the report of the UK and consultant one in the case of the US. So when you put everything together, it did come up that, of course, we knew at the time that given all the hints given as to who government official one or consultant one was, it was former Vice President Mahama at the time. At the time he was Vice President. Fast forward, 2012, President Mills passed on just around the same time that Yar'Adua also passed on, and then the Vice President Mahama became president. Now, I must also say that this matter, even though legal, is more even political than legal. So in 2020, Mahama was running for re-election. He had become president in 2012, lost the election in 2016, seeking a re-election or seeking to come back to power, in 2020 when Nana Akufo-Addo was president and is still president. 2020 was an election year. The report came up in 2020. So quickly, the president, through his secretary, wrote to the anti-corruption czar of Ghana, the special prosecutor, asking him to launch investigations into the alleged bribery scandal. So that became a huge political matter. Why the president would be so swift in referring a matter to the anti-corruption czar when there were a lot of other corruption matters in Ghana trying for investigation. So that went on for a while. It's also important to point out that at the time, the anti-corruption czar was someone who many actually knew had issues with Mr. Mahama's government. He was a member of Mr. Mahama's government when Mr. Mahama's boss, Atta Mills, was around. He was the Attorney General. For some reason, they fell out and he was sacked from government. Because of his fame and his reputation for fighting anti-corruption, when this government comes seeking to have a political buy-in, etc., they appointed him.
However, just before you go, now that this has come out, what is the government of Nana Akufo-Addo saying?
Well, the government hasn't said anything. We've not really heard anything officially from government. We've only heard from supporters of the government saying that a special prosecutor didn't do a good job. The special prosecutor didn't focus on the real issues. We don't know what those real issues are. But again, I told you earlier that it's a legal matter, but it's political as well. Yeah. This year is another election year in Ghana, and President Mahama, or former President Mahama, is a candidate in this election as well. This time running against the vice president of Mr. Akufo-Addo. So that context is important to bring understanding to the whole matter.
Okay, all right. So thank you so much. Thank you for giving us context.
It's been a matter around the neck.
Thank you for giving us context and backstories to what's really happening in that situation in Ghana. Thank you so much, Salum Adono, the good practitioner from Accra, Ghana, for joining us today on Africa Update.
It's a pleasure.
All right, so my in-house guest, again, Ambassador Warkani, and he was here last week, and we were going to talk about protests. We'll touch that later. But what do you have to say about this situation? Just maybe in 1 minute.
Okay, well, let me say, beside the political angle at home in Ghana as a domestic issue, generally speaking, let's say President Mahama might be a victim of international commercial, strategic, and military interest, because one will ask the question, why was this investigation started from the United States of America? And the answer is simple. It started from America because America was just trying to protect its own interest of its commercial ventures in Boeing Aircraft Corporation.
Okay.
And they are just trying to make sure they smear the rival Airbus in Europe for the sales of this aircraft. Because what it means is, if Airbus had not sold these aircrafts to like the 5 countries listed, Indonesia, Taiwan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Ghana, it means these contracts would have gone to America.
Okay, so let's go back a bit now. It's not like as if America is the producer of Airbus. It's a European company.
Airbus is a European company with headquarters in Toulouse, in France.
Okay.
And so they are in stiff competition with Boeing.
Who's an American company.
An American company, Seattle, particularly in America. So at any point in time, America will always go out and make sure it smears any other competitor.
But why is America, that's the question mostly, why is America now interfering in a France company? It's its headquarters situated in California or Silicon Valley, because...
America is interested because it is losing business to Airbus, which is a European conglomerate of almost all the European countries, including Britain. Now, you will see that here, a very high international politics is actually at play.
Yeah.
It's not a question of maybe something happening in Ghana alone. It is something that has spread across so many countries because of the commercial interest America has in its Boeing Aircraft Corporation. It will not allow anybody to sell any aircraft to anybody except where they have no choices to make. And therefore they will instigate any kind of stories to make sure they protect their own. That is the stance of America almost all the time, including even operating airlines around the world. Second, if monies were established to have been paid by Airbus, to whom is this money paid? Over $5 million or euros have been earmarked to say they had gone to anyone who could influence the purchase of these military aircrafts in those countries. So there are some intricacies that needs to be understood clearly before decisions or opinions are formed, so that it is not out of context what is really going on. But primarily, it is America's interest versus the interest of others around the world.
Okay. Wow. As another context, you're giving us to the conversation, actually, on what's happening with the Airbus thing. Now, we're going to go to South Sudan, where they are saying they're not ready. Now, this is coming from a UN top envoy in the troubled African country, saying the country isn't ready for its first post-independence elections in December, and political leaders are discussing whether voting should be held this year. Now, Africa News tells us more.
The upcoming elections in South Sudan stands in limbo. The United Nations said on Tuesday that the country is not yet ready for an election, citing the constitutional time frame. According to sources, Sudan has not implemented a critical mass of the key steps for free and fair elections till date.
In the preparation for elections, the Political Parties Council has adopted a code of conduct and registered 29 political parties, but concerns exist regarding the procedures followed and the registration fees. The National Elections Commission has reconstituted the state-level high committees, but there are still concerns about criteria used and gender representation.
The United Nations peacekeeping mission was mandated to support the creation of an enabling environment for elections in South Sudan and also help protect civilians.
South Sudan remains steadfast in its commitment to the revitalized agreement on the resolution of the conflict in South Sudan and the roadmap that extended our transitional period. While we have made significant strides, including the allocation of funds to the National Election Commission, the Political Parties Council, and the National Constitutional Review Commission, we recognize that benchmarks for holding the elections still need to be fully met. We are working diligently to address these challenges and reiterate our dedication to ensuring smooth and inclusive electoral process.
The vote, which will be the first since South Sudan gained independence from Sudan in 2011 after a long conflict, is meant to be the culmination of a peace agreement signed 5 years ago.
Now that's 13 years, 13 years of independence from Sudan, and somehow they've not been able to have their own first democratic elections. Ambassador, what do you have to say?
Well, thank you, and viewers once more. These are some of the, can I say, typical African setting of things. The enclave called South Sudan fought a civil war with the main Sudan for 27 years, and eventually Sudan accepted through the interventions of the international community to grant the secession request. Say, okay, South Sudan, you can now go home. South Sudan came back to their own enclave and now set up a government. And not long after, conflict brewed between the president and the vice president. They were unable to agree on how to share power. So, you see, for the past 11 or so years, no election ever took place.
So, this president and vice president came into power as a way of, okay, you were the one that fought for it, we're going to give it to you.
Yes, the main freedom fighter, let me say, was Dr. John Garang, who died in a helicopter crash just before that independence was granted to South Sudan.
Okay.
And so he left his lieutenants, namely Silva Kiir and his vice, to now go and set up the new South Sudan. South Sudan came back home and now say, yes, we have self-government of this enclave. We wanted to be away from the main Sudan because we suffered religious persecution.
Okay.
And non-inclusivity in the governance of Sudan. Now today, the people of South Sudan came back home jubilating. We are happy to have a self-government in that area. However, it didn't take 6 good months before disagreements became very obvious between the two main parties. The same party, same everything, but they disagreed totally. And so many peace meetings, reconciliation efforts, and what have you, by the United Nations, by African Union, and some good governance, other entities, tried to broker peace between these two gladiators, let me say. Unfortunately, that was not really possible. Now, we can see one man has dominated power in the new government of South Sudan since then and up to now. So what we are seeing is a gradual transformation of a supposedly democratic government into a monarchy.
Again.
A new monarchy in Africa, because 11 good years, no elections. Every time the election comes, you will find excuses why the elections cannot hold. Like we have seen, some of the excuses are that constitutionally there are some areas that needs to be tinkered with to ensure this or that, or logistically the country was not ready as of finances and other things.
The country is not ready as for finances, but somehow they've been running. The president has been feeding, he has been leaving. So, how is it possible that it's difficult to run an election?
Well,
for 11 years.
Precisely. That is the dilemma that you usually find some of these political undertones or maneuvers that you find around. Any excuse can be manufactured at the right time for the wrong reasons. And South Sudan is a clear case of why sometimes agitations for secession in Africa may not necessarily be a solution
to the problem. Yes.
Because when a particular enclave is given the right to say, okay, go home,
do your thing.
When you come back home, you find that even at home, there may not necessarily be that so-called peace. And so the new enclave cannot even run itself, because South Sudan, surprisingly, has all the resources you can think of, from crude oil to minerals and
we're
what
going
have
to go
you.
there.
Good. And yet, since it came back, today, if you ask people, the real citizens of South Sudan, since the independence, in quotes, have you had a better life than you had when you were in the main Sudan? The answer will surely be no, because infrastructurally, there hasn't been any significant change in South Sudan to merit all the efforts spent 27 running years of waste of human resources and materials fighting for an independence that today cannot be translated into peace, tranquility, and development for South Sudan.
All right. Okay, so we're going to kind of bring everything tying up together. We're going to look at the UN peacekeeping mission, actually. How is this supporting them for an election? And then, you know, there's a ruptured oil pipeline over there. And of course, the South Sudanese pound has depreciated. How is this now affecting the economy and people's basic access to basic commodities?
Well, you see, the economy of South Sudan was based generally on the availability of this crude oil that was discovered just before that independence. And now South Sudan, unfortunately, is landlocked. And so the pipelines have to go through other countries to access the sea. And in that regard, you will see that there were complex negotiations that had to be entered into to enable South Sudan to sell its crude. The Chinese, for instance, have been very, very active in South Sudan to ensure that they take a large part of this crude. And today, internal disagreements have led to some of these, let me say, militant actions to disrupt this crude supply, to enable government bring back, bring the government to its knees to negotiate power. And so you will see a scenario where the major tribes in South Sudan are now contesting against each other to see who can possibly take the larger part of the resources of the state. And these are complex issues that until and unless South Sudan really sits down and passionately look at them, there may not be peace enough, there may not be resources sincerely enough, and for both the elections and development thereafter. So it's a challenge that, for instance, the African Union, I'm sure, is at a loss as to what to do with such a developing scenario.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for being on the show today, giving us your insights as usual on matters concerning the African continent and at times even the global stage. It's been a pleasure having you. We're going to go on a very short break, and when we return, looking at the health matters affecting the African continent. That's the Mpox and cholera. Do stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. It's the Africa Update on Trust TV from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. Health matters on the African continent. The WHO, World Health Organization, has officially declared the ongoing Mpox outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and neighboring African countries a public health emergency of international concern. Also is the issue of the cholera. Now, it has reported, that's WHO, a significant global resurgence of the disease cholera with over 307,000 cases and 2,326 deaths across 26 countries between January and July. Let's take a look.
The World Health Organization has declared the Mpox outbreak in Congo and elsewhere in Africa to be a global emergency. The virus is usually mild but can cause rashes and lesions on the face and hands that can spread to other parts of the body, in some cases can be fatal.
We need to understand the transmission patterns. We need to understand the populations that are risked, and it's dynamic. There are multiple outbreaks that are happening. There are changes in terms of what we're seeing in the epidemiology itself. To understand that better will help us to use the limited numbers of vaccines that we have in a targeted and a most appropriate way. So I want to stress that one point. And secondly, to request, if there are countries that have vaccines to donate, to come forward and to work with us.
Since January 2023, the DRC has reported more than 22,000 suspect Mpox cases and more than 1,200 deaths.
And a person is considered infectious from the onset of symptoms until the skin lesions have crusted and the crusts have fallen off and there's a new layer of skin. Transmission occurs mainly by large respiratory droplets or by direct contact with body fluids, skin lesions, or contaminated clothing or bedding.
There are two types of Mpox, Clade 1 and Clade 2. Clade 1 usually causes a higher percentage of people with Mpox to get severely sick compared to Clade 2. Clade 1 is endemic in DRC.
A cumulative total of 307,000 cholera cases and 2,300 deaths were reported from 26 countries between January this year and July, according to the World Health Organization, the WHO. According to the health agency, the Eastern Mediterranean region recorded the highest numbers, followed by the African region, the Southeast Asian region, the region of the Americas, and the European Union. The cholera response is facing significant challenges due to a severe shortage of oral cholera vaccine, also known as OCV, with the demands far exceeding supply. Since January 2023, 18 countries have requested 105 million doses, nearly double the 55 million doses produced during this period. In January 2023, the World Health Organization classified the global cholera resurgence as a grade 3 emergency, its highest level for emergencies. Given the increasing number of outbreaks, their geographic spread, and the ongoing vaccine and resource shortages, WHO has continued to assess the global risk as very high, maintaining the grade 3 emergency status. The WHO said warming temperatures that allow the cholera bacteria to live longer has worsened outbreaks and led to the highest death rates in a decade.
There you have it. It's been quite a very interesting conversation today, but because of this disease happening on the African continent, do well to keep your environments clean and safe, especially for the cholera outbreak and for the Mpox. If you can get a vaccine, please do so to get one. Thank you for joining us today on Africa Update, where we've brought you up to date on what's happening on the continent. Till I see you same time, same place next week. Don't forget to follow us on our social media platforms and on our YouTube live stream. My name is Chiamaka. Nwafor.